So thanks so much, Jen, for coming on and giving me your time. I've got so many questions. I want to talk to you because I want to get your unique opinion on chess, but in particular on women's chess, because I know you've been a very vocal advocate for women's chess and you've been trying to get more women to play the game. But first I want to get started with asking you if you can explain to me what is it that you like about the game, and just a few words.
In a few words, well, yeah, I guess what I love most about the game is the artistic side of it, like the beautiful studies and sacrifices. And then I also like that chess is like a time capsule for history and art. So it goes so far back and you can kind of learn so many things about history and art history by looking at chess.
When you started playing chess, was there anything special about being a girl?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a chess family, so I started playing very young. But I definitely noticed, some people didn't expect me to be as good. Also, it was just a little hard to make friends. And I think the social aspect of chess is so important. So that was probably the most difficult part, especially for like kids who are between 11 and 14, because I think that's like a very crucial age range. And it was for me too. I actually quit chess around that time for a couple of years.
I know that you mentioned on another podcast that you were bullied in school, and how did that influence your decision or your experience in chess in general?
Maybe it's certainly potentially connected, because that was around the same time. Well, those were the years that I kind of dropped out of the game. So potentially, maybe it was actually even younger. Maybe it was like 6th grade and 7th grade. I think by 8th grade, I was already like a little more accepted. There are a couple things. I think that I was always one of the youngest in my class. So I do think the younger kids are a little bit more vulnerable to getting bullied. And that's why you see a lot of wealthy parents nowadays in America. They're always trying to like get their kids into like the lower class, which is so funny because it's kind of like the opposite when I was a kid. When I was a kid, I think that people would want their like kids to be in the more high level group so that they'd be more advanced, or graduate school early. But now it's like you actually go to these tournaments sometimes in America, the kindergarten championships and stuff, and you might see kids who are like a lot older than other kids, and it's because the parents like deliberately want to make sure that their kids are like the smartest and the strongest and not getting bullied. So yeah, it's something kind of interesting that has shifted in education and parents' philosophies toward it. But I would say that was maybe one of the reasons I was bullied. And it happens to a lot of kids, in those age ranges, you're usually either going to be bullied or be one of the bullies. So it is part of, I think, that adolescence experience. And yeah, I did stop playing chess. So potentially there was some kind of relationship.
And was the competition against your brother a motivating factor?
No, not really, because he was so much better than me that it wasn't really motivating. No. But it was good. When I got back into it, it was motivating because there was like somebody else to talk about chess with. So that's good. But as a kid, not really.
One thing I remember you wrote in your book about how you got knocked out of the 2004, I think it was, Women's World Championship in the first round. And then you went on to win the US Women's Championship. What was the mental process you went through? Because I remember you were describing it as something like you were devastated and you were just so disappointed, and that what was your mental process behind just recovering from that?
I mean, honestly, I don't even remember, because I'm a professional poker player since then and done so many like big events that I've had so many disappointments. And I mean, I have to say, like, if you ask me to think about my biggest disappointments in chess, that one doesn't really rank that high anymore. I'd say the biggest one would be like the US championship that I tied for first and I lost. And maybe I also write in the book about this game in Seattle that I played against like Olga Sagalchik, and I was totally winning this dragon, and I just blew it. And I ended up coming second in that event. And it was a little bit of a softer US championship than usual because Irina couldn't make it. So it would have been a great opportunity for my first title. So like those are some of the things that kind of stick out at me. The other one, that one doesn't really register as much.
You wrote in your book Chess Bitch. It's basically like a autobiography, a history book of women's history in chess, and also like a social critique. I think it's like a very, very interesting book. And first of all, I want to know, because of the title. It's, I don't know, it's really even hard for me to say it. How did you come up with the title, and why did you name it that?
The title is Bitch is because I think that women who are aggressive and defiant of the status quo, which is often, you know, sexist and racist, are often called bitches, and that this is like a reclaiming of the word so that it's a positive. It's also just really catchy, chess bitch. And I wasn't really the first one to use bitch in this way in America. There's actually a magazine called Bitch Magazine. There's a bunch of writers who had done it even before me. Although I felt like my iteration of it was very powerful because the title really sounds like shocking. And in a way, I think that's what I was going for, in that you don't think of like women as these powerful chess players who are like crushing their opponents. And that's what I was looking for. But I do think that in other languages, it doesn't translate as well. So I understand that. I think in Europe, it doesn't translate as well because maybe bitch is used more as like a synonym for prostitute. In America, it's not really like that. Unfortunately, we have so many slurs for women that bitch is usually more like a woman that is you don't like because she's mean. That's usually how we use it in America. Usually like a powerful woman who's mean. It doesn't usually have any kind of sexual connotation. Not as much, that's for sure. Maybe for some people they do use the word that way, but it's definitely more of like a personality, nasty personality description in American English.
And what motivated you to write the book?
I mean, it was so long ago, but I thought it was a great topic because there hadn't been really a lot of great writing on it. And I was studying, you know, gender and art and literature in college. And I thought that I could apply a lot of these things that I was reading and learning about to chess and also interject story. So yeah, that's what motivated me, that it didn't exist. And it seemed like a gap in the literature. So why not fill it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it's the only book that discusses women in chess like in more detail. You know, it's really interesting. I mean, like, what is your opinion generally on like things like women titles, for example? Do you think they make sense?
No, I think it's a question that's asked a lot, almost ad nauseum. I'd say, like, so it's a little hard for me to take the question like on its straightforward surface, like from a journalist like you who's really asking it in a sincere way. It's hard to almost hear it sincerely anymore because honestly, that question is used to really harass women in online forums. There's a word for it apparently. It's that I learned about recently called sea lioning. So like, suppose there's a woman who's got a women title displayed and she's doing commentary on a major chess event. I am not kidding you. Literally 60 to 70% of the chat will be dominated by why there are women's titles. And it won't stop for 4 hours. It's like insane. Like the first time it happened to me, I was like, you know, Danny, maybe we should take down the WGM title from my name and put like FM or something. But then he wrote me back and I was like, but WGM is like a higher rating, you know, and like, why wouldn't you want to display that? You know, it's almost like letting the trolls win a point by like, you know, being so affected by it that you take down a title that actually denotes a higher rating than the other one. And I don't know, I actually kind of liked his point. And, you know, so that's why the question is difficult for me. That said, I do think it's actually a good idea to somehow merge them with gender neutral titles so that a WGM and an IM could be like kind of merged. So depending on which one you like better, you could use it. But do remember that there's also FIDE is an international organization. So there are countries where women really do not have the same rights as men, not even close. And there's a lot of discrimination, a lot of overt discrimination, not like some of the very problematic policies that America has, with childcare and other things like that, but much, much more overt discrimination. And so I feel like I don't really have the right to say like these people in these countries who achieve the WGM title don't deserve to be proud of it. Like, I think that's wrong, that chess is an international game, and that I think this title inspires a lot of negativity, and that's really what I like the least about it. That I don't have an issue personally with the title, but I do have an issue with the negativity that results out of it, which, by the way, is like a hot rod for women in chess in general. And maybe one of the reasons that I stopped playing as much, actually. It just feels like as soon as people talk about women in chess, they get very negative. It's always negative. It's like, oh, why are there women's titles? Why are there women's events? And it's like a spiral of negativity. And I think when a conversation about a topic is always negative, why would people want to go to it as much? So that's for me, my career. I'm always trying to like make it like more positive with art, with activities, with literature, and not a spiral of why aren't there more of us?
Yeah, I remember you were having this discussion with Tanya in a YouTube video on the St. Louis Chess Club, where you just have a very innocuous discussion about if chess is sexist, or generally the sexism that occurs in chess, and women's role in chess. And some of the comments I've seen under that video, I remember the first time it came out, I watched it. I was probably one of the first few viewers, and the comments under that video were just absolutely shocking. I mean, it's just like you were like questioning your humanity. I don't know what to say. It's just like as if discussing these kinds of subjects in no matter what fashion, it was really just like very, very mild opinions. You were even saying that chess is not much more sexist than the general population. I think you were not even saying that there's anything special about it. But just because of the topic, it was so toxic that you look like you just think you can't win. No matter how you try to discuss it or how you approach it, it's just a toxic subject in a sense. Women's role in chess, or maybe in society, you can't really approach that subject without attracting these kind of negative comments or connotations, I think.
Maybe it's difficult. It's difficult, but it is possible. I don't think YouTube is a great forum. YouTube does seem to, collect like a lot of these mean comments about women's chess if they're not moderated aggressively. But I think like every community is a little different. Like I think, for instance, on Twitter, you see a lot more reasonable conversation for the most part. So yeah, it depends on what platform you're using and how it's moderated. But yeah, I'd shudder to think that YouTube comments represent the actual average viewpoint. If they do, that's not good.
I think because the kind of issues that you discuss are really interesting. That it's basically always the same question, right? Where you say, are there biological differences between men or women, and if so, what should we do about them? I think your opinion, you've said it many times. Even in your book, I've got a really nice quote where you say, playing a highly focused board game for 4 to 6 hours is difficult, and neither men nor women are born with the concentration and motivation to excel at it. For that reason, I find the emphasis on women's biological inferiority absurd. When it comes to chess, we are all born inept. So you're basically saying there are no biological differences, right?
Well, I think that what I'm saying is I think the focus on it is ridiculous. But that doesn't mean I think there's absolutely no difference whatsoever biologically. I mean, even if you just look at pregnancy, like if a woman is peaking between the ages of like 20 to 35 in chess, like, and now everything's becoming so hyper competitive that if there's potential interruption in a year, maybe that's difficult to become like the number one in the world, makes it like slightly less likely. but it's certainly not impossible. But I just think that I wouldn't say it's impossible that there's any biological difference, but I do think that there's a obsession with them, and often by people who are not scientists or psychologists or who really even statisticians. They just seem to enjoy a bad faith discussion that criticizes women. That's what I often interpret, that it's not like this interesting intellectual exploration to try to figure out the difference between male and female and how we can improve our brains and our society by seeing like these differences. Like a good faith attempt like that is interesting to me. I mean, I'm very interested in getting more girls and women involved and good at chess. So if somebody wants to say like, if you teach women in like this way, maybe that would be really great because the way they're brought up is often a little different. So maybe you need to use this teaching technique. Like, I have no issue with conversations like that. I just have issues with conversations that are negative and often spiral into a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the point, like, what's the goal of the discussion? I think that's always an important question for me. To explain why it's this way and it's never going to change. That's not a good goal for me. I don't like.
I also remember you saying on another podcast that if there are biological differences, you said, I think the fact it could discourage women from playing the game is a reason not to talk about it.
Yeah, pretty much. I think context just matters. It's like there's scientists, there's research, and I don't believe that all research related to gender should be canceled because we might find out things that we don't want to find out. Like, that's ridiculous. I don't believe that. But I do think that when it gets filtered into the mainstream and non-scientists, that concerns me, because then sometimes it just becomes like this, thesis that's detached from all of the statistics and the research that actually went into it. And it can be, spread to children who are, so brilliant and capable of anything, really, if they want to like really put themselves, if they apply themselves, right? Their brains are so malleable. So that scares me, just the practical implications of it being, misconstrued, and then educators teaching people who are very impressionable. Like, for instance, I went to a chess camp when I was a kid, and there was somebody talking about like the psychological distribution. He was talking about the distribution of IQ in males and females, and trying to show how women probably wouldn't be as great chess players. And I think I was like 10 or 11 when he gave this demonstration. So that's obviously very inappropriate, Like, there's no reason why a very young person needs to hear stuff about why they're less likely to succeed. It's with no real takeaways. So that's the kind of thing that worries me more than like just researching or talking about it in general.
So should we consider teaching men and women differently? I mean, you also go into it in your book. I've got this quote where you say, it's like a study from Linda Gilbert, and she points out, when fathers were highly educated, only the sons excelled in chess. But when the mothers were highly educated, both girls and boys excelled. Whether the mother were chess players made no difference. Successful mothers seem to transfer their professional ambition to their daughters. So I guess that kind of implies maybe a difference in teaching?
Maybe. I mean, maybe it's, I just think in general you want to teach, it's important for people to learn from people that look like them. So if you can hire female chess teachers, if you can hire teachers of color, so that underrepresented groups see themselves in their teachers, I think that's really important. So that's one way in which in chess it's become a little easier recently. I think there are more female teachers and coaches. So I run this program for US Chess Women, and we bring in different speakers and coaches every single week. And it's ever since the pandemic stopped on live chess tournaments and live chess camps. And it's actually really easy to get people because there's so many incredible women in America and also beyond that want to come in and speak to my students. So I think that's still important.
And so, I mean, if we draw attention to those differences, I think also important is that we expose these kind of sexist tropes that you also discuss in your book. I mean, I've got another quote. I mean, you can probably tell I really liked your book. It's like where you had a quote from Susan Polgar when you were training with her. Now, menstruation may not require that someone take a day off, but it might affect, for instance, the choice of opening. Michael mentioned a computer program that a Soviet friend of his had developed, which could determine how at any given day the menstrual cycle would affect play.
That's hilarious, right? Well, some women have really heavy periods. I mean, I guess to me, my reaction at that time was very negative because obviously I think it's rude to talk about, especially a guy talking about it to women. Again, it's this like sense that women are inferior in some way. But on the other hand, in another way, I think it's also great that coaches, care because, women, if they don't have a coach who cares at all, like there might not, sometimes you go to like World Youth and it's more out of the way. It's hard to find stores. So like, it's actually good that somebody's like paying attention and making sure that like if a girl needs supplies or if for some reason she starts menstruating for the first time at a tournament, it's like, it's tough. It's just a tough question because you want to have this line where you're not being intrusive and overly personal and negative, but that if you are a coach and a student is encountering an issue without their parent there for the first time, or in general, you want to be supportive. And that goes back to what we were just talking about the importance of having female chess coaches so that they can understand if something like that happens and that it can be woman to woman.
I think you also said that women are more mindful of being watched and are more worried about if they lose a game what the coaches may say, and men on the other hand are just angry that they lost, and so when they play a game that where men are watching them, they are just too intimidated or too worried to really play the kind of lines that they would usually go for, just because they are thinking about what others are like thinking how their play is bad. Or
I feel like that can be a positive and a negative, and it's about finding the right balance. Because in some ways it's good to think about like what your coach would think about a certain move because they're probably a really good player. So maybe it will make you play faster, make you play more practically. Like, I don't think that's actually all bad. But if you overdo it and you're unable to actually zone in and get in that flow experience of just feeling the position, then it's bad. So like so many things in life, it's not about it being bad or good, but somewhere in the middle of being optimal for peak performance. But yeah, definitely like women worrying more about what people think of them and how they look is an impediment to just completely being absorbed in the topic at hand. And it seems that in chess, as the number one thing that you need to succeed in game is focus and flow. So anything that interrupts that's going to be problematic.
So you mentioned also that you were intimidated at times by players who ranked higher than you, and that one of your friends said that when you first won the Women's US Championship in 2002, that you probably didn't play your best games because you had relaxed too much and because you had the title already for the Women's Championship. But if you were a man, you would have to still play your best to get the Open US Championship. So that may be a kind of a factor that you just you don't face the best competition, and that's why you relax a little bit, or that because someone is very high rated that you just generally are just very careful about how you play. I mean, I can say, for example, in my experience, when I play online chess, I don't care about the rating of the player. I don't even look at their rating. Actually, I just whatever, I just look at the board and I just play my game. And when I beat them, I look at the rating, and the guy is 200 points higher rated than me. I know that when you sit across the board, you have the name and title and the rating, and maybe you could introduce a factor where you just have the name and not even the title, just because to see if there's any difference in women playing better, because I'm aware of a study where they had women play anonymously against anonymous opponents, and when they were told that they're facing male opponents, they were playing much worse than when they were told they were facing women opponents. You know, they played much better.
Yeah, I think that I read those studies, and it's interesting because I'm working on something related to that, but I'm not sure how strong the effect is. And also remember that it could be an effect that against other women, they want to win even more. Doesn't necessarily mean they don't care about winning against men. So again, two ways to look at it, but instinctively everybody wants to look at it the negative way when it's women. And I just, you see this again and again. There's always this instinct to be negative, look like, why is this bad? As opposed to saying like, oh, look, they perform even better against women. Maybe that's because they really respect other female chess players and they want to show their best games and make friends with them. There's so many different explanations for that, right? So going back to your original question about ratings and playing without them, I mean, honestly, I think ratings are probably pretty accurate. I think maybe the potential for a lot of players, not just women, is much higher than what they have if they are easily distracted and not able to get into a flow state. So arguably, if that's true for women even more than men, and I'm not sure if that's the case, but maybe it is, then perhaps they have like a high ceiling that if they overcome that mental hurdle, they'll shoot up. That's great. That's great if it's true. And again, that's something that I mentioned earlier, a way to think about the differences between men and women and how they were brought up and whether it's nature or nurture, and use it as a positive, like a real goal of trying to make women able to fill their full potential. And what else do we want but that?
And what about, I mean, you also talked in your book about the objectification of women in chess. You got this great quote where you say, throughout the chess world, chatter about the looks of the top women players is constant, usually complimentary but sometimes nasty. When the women players contest the chess match, the live commentary from spectators on the internet often focuses more on their bodies and whether they are hot or doable than on their chess variations. So, I mean, you wrote this book 15 years ago, and when you were just saying that, you know, all of 90% of the chat is like negative towards women's titles and everything, it seems like after 15 years, not much has changed.
Yeah, now it's more about women's titles. Like, I think that there is more moderation now in most chats. So if you just start talking about a woman's body or looks, it usually just gets shut down. You get banned. So that would be more behind the surfaces. And, you know, it's something we all have to keep aware of these days with our increasingly visual culture with Instagram, and, well, particularly Instagram's a big one because that's like a pure photograph site, right? About lookism. You know, it's not just women, but in general, this like superficial valuing of people based on how beautiful they are or how great they look. And I just think that you see it even more with women, that it's so difficult in this society not to be prey to the halo effect, that if somebody's beautiful, they're also a great person. I mean, it's difficult for me too. I've seen it happen to the most brilliant and well-intentioned people in the world. People just want to be around beautiful people because it's so entrenched in our culture that you have to really fight it if you want to become more, you know, more, I don't know what the word is because we don't really talk about lookism that much anymore. But if you want to be more just, you have to like really consciously fight it because it's so ingrained to just be nicer to people that are beautiful, to be more interested in being around them. There's a social capital that people who are more beautiful bring. And of course you see that in chess as well, in that there's a lot of attention given to more beautiful people, right? It's inevitable, but maybe we can do some more to fight it. And one thing I try to do is just, when you write an article about women chess players, just make sure that you're putting in their games not their pictures only. And what is that ratio from the women's side and the men's side? And if you start realizing that way more photos of women are going up than games and positions, maybe think about how to adjust that.
One great observation from your book, another quote where you say, in the chess world, the sexuality of top male players is private and implied, while discussions of a woman's sexuality is open to all. I think that's such a great observation where you and you also go into like the even the open sexism of like the one of the most one of the biggest websites, ChessBase, where they talk about this female player Ksenia Rybenko.
Oh yeah, I do remember that. ChessBase used to have so many pictures of women all the time, young women, and there used to be these articles about them. I think it's gotten a lot better though. It's more normal now. I think their news articles. Yeah.
If you say that this kind of open objectification was just common, I mean, you also have like quotes from ChessBase's founder where he basically says, well, don't you want to advance women in chess, and show the world that we are not all like boring women, nerds and everything, so we need to bikini and all that stuff. What do you say to that?
Well, that's a really common argument. And, I think actually my views on this have changed a little bit since Chess Bitch. I mean, even then I was very like sex positive, that I didn't really think it was bad if women wanted to be more sexual. But I think even more now, it's like, I think that people should do what they want to do, and because to win in our culture, often it's even more valuable for women to push their looks. Far be it from me to tell them to not do that. I can't. It doesn't really compute if I want people to be as successful as they can be. What I can do is say people in power, educators, people who care about this stuff, like try not to focus as much on people's looks when you hire, when you talk about, when you write about, when you give attention to. But when it comes to young women, I mean, they realize that in order to get a sponsorship, in order to be, more popular, that putting a bunch of really cool photos on their Instagram is going to do that. So what is it going to mean if somebody says like, oh, stop doing that because you're objectifying yourselves? Like, that's silly. Like, people are going to do what they want to do to be successful and popular. We're not going to stop that. What we can try is make those things like a little bit more intellectual and ethical. And the best way to do that is model it ourselves, because that alone is pretty freaking difficult. Because I'm like an art person and creative person, and I like beautiful photos as well. So I think that this is a personal challenge for me.
How do you see the issue of women's rights in chess, and basically the link between politics and the game? I mean, in the book you also write about how during the start of the Second World War, Sonja Graf, a German player during the World Championships in Argentina, refused to play under the Nazi flag, and where these kind of things where women chose a political stance over their own interests. For example, also like Naji Pakidze in 2016, when she refused to play in Iran because she thought the headscarf is an oppressive symbol and makes her a second-class citizen. Or Anna Muzichuk, when she refused to defend her titles in Saudi Arabia because of the stigma attached to women and how they treat women. Do you think these kind of conflations between politics and the game, especially by women, to advance women's rights is appropriate?
Yeah, I mean, it's great if you can use chess for the greater good, to show, how women deserve rights everywhere. And I think that Sonja Graf's story is absolutely incredible. It's just so unsobering to think of that. If it hadn't lined up like that, she would have been killed. It's really one of the most incredible stories, I think, in the book. The story of Vera Menchik and Sonja Graf, and you think about all these chess tournaments that were canceled in those years, and how chess itself is a marker of prosperity in a way, because people are going all around playing chess tournaments, then it means that things are probably pretty good. in life. And, looking at this very terrible year, objectively, you see at least a glimpse of what maybe some of our ancestors went through. And I'm not saying it's the same, certainly not for me. Like, I'm very comfortable, but you still see all this sickness, all this death, all this destruction of industry and leisure. And so obviously some of those effects happened in those years as well.
So another important thing I wanted to get into, and maybe I have to preface this question with a quote that is actually about a quite recent and current subject. It's from Kareem Abdul-Jabbar when he talked about racism in America due to the recent police killings. And he basically said, racism in America is like dust in the air, where it's kind of invisible unless you shine light on it, right? Then you see it, because otherwise you wouldn't see it even if you choke on it. And one of the most important issues, I think you didn't go into the book. I mean, you went into the objectification of women and how they're treated, and basically a social critique of chess. But what was entirely missing was sexual harassment, the issue of that. And particularly if you consider recent events where, professional esports players have been accused of sexually abusing women, and also, for example, particularly Alexandra Botez recently talked about how she got taken advantage of when she was at a party with like chess players. And I think it's really important to tell those stories and to really expose it, because, as I say, otherwise we would just pretend it's not there. And as she also said, everyone knew it happened, but nobody said anything. And I wonder if you have any of these stories and if you would like to share them.
Well, that's a good point. I guess, by talking about objectification, I was kind of like alluding to sometimes like very extreme examples of objectification that in themselves, especially if directed to young people, could be considered harassment and even illegal. I think that's a fair criticism. Maybe it's something I should have put more in the book about. It's because there's obviously a lot of harassment and potentially assault in the chess world. I guess it's one of those topics where, I would have had to be absolutely sure of the research and, talking to sources and making sure they wanted to talk about these things in the book. I don't think at the time people shared as openly these stories of harassment and assault. So anything that I talked about would probably have to be my own experience, which I certainly had so many of. I mean, of course, and even me probably less than most people, because I, usually was traveling to tournaments with my family, and my dad is like, really popular and was very, an Iron Man, and then my brother, of course. So people tend to be afraid of people who are around like, very influential males. They usually try to go after people who are alone, who aren't with their family, who don't have like a lot of contacts. And, that kind of ties into things that I've noticed as well, that a lot of times these predators, they really go after people who are alone. So you're right. If there's a second edition of this book, there should be a lot more attention to that. And I saw Alexandra Botez's clip as well. And she's a friend of mine, and we've worked on projects together. And it was very sad to hear about, that this goes on.
Yeah, I mean.
Yeah.
And
it's totally unacceptable. And it starts with, but that's the thing. It starts with this like acceptance of objectifying kids who are underage. And like, I've seen that happen before. And like, sometimes I'm busy doing commentary and I kind of like see the chat from the corner of my eye and I don't pay as much attention. But like, there's been times when I've seen something said about an underage girl and I'm like, that just has to go now. Like that, we cannot promote that culture at all.
I mean, and even at tournaments, right? I've seen like pictures, and Alex talked about it as well, where there's like a guy literally sitting right next to her, staring at her while she's at the board, and stories of where like one of her friends has to come over and kind of pretend to be calling her to do something just to get away from someone, and and that happens at tournaments. And I guess if that's so pervasive and accepted, then there must be just a culture that just permits that, right?
Well, I think that's also it's not just the chess culture, it's also the American culture. I mean, it's just our culture in general, and it's getting better with like the Me Too movement from a couple years ago. But this expectation that women will sometimes be harassed and stalked, that's even borne out in romantic comedies where it's like a plot device. It's something that the culture is like actively needing to change. And you're right, the fact that women have to have like a buddy system to attack that is pretty crazy. And I think one of the best things for that, okay, there's official policies, that's great. Like at US Chess, we have a more stringent policies, background checks, all that's good. But I think that men really need to police themselves a lot as well, because a lot of this is going to happen at private parties away from the official events. And so that means that you need to be that dork who breaks up the party before anything happens. And socially, it's very difficult for people to do. But we need more people like that. I mean, I avoid sometimes. I guess one instance I had that it comes to mind is there was an underage girl, and there was somebody, like a chess official, not a player, like maybe he played also, but he was really like inappropriately hitting on her and trying to get her drunk. And I remember being so horrified, but she was already, I think, a little tipsy, so she was kind of going along with it. And then I felt like, okay, now I have to hang out with her for the rest of the night to make sure that like nothing bad happens. And I did that, and I think it all turned out okay. But it's just disgusting that it's allowed to happen in an official chess event.
Have you voiced concerns, for example, to some of the arbiters, or do you think that we should like institute a kind of institutional arrangement where women in particular can come forward anonymously towards someone and bring to attention certain inappropriate behavior by players or by other people who are at the tournament, and to have that arranged at every kind of tournament, so where people know they can go to this particular person or into a particular room and just voice their concerns?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea for there to be like some reporting mechanism. But like I said, I think the large majority of this stuff happens at like bars and parties that are basically not part of the official event, which makes it harder. Oftentimes after the event is over, that's when there's always the biggest parties with the most alcohol, right? So I think that that's why it also just, people have to be better in general, because there's a limit to what like official institutions can do if it's happening like off the premises, right? Or even like in text messaging and other types of things afterwards. But yeah, I believe that tournaments should, have some kind of reporting mechanism.
What would be your advice for young girls or women, up and coming chess players, to look out for something that is maybe not that obvious and that they should know about?
What should they know about in chess? Young women. Well, I think they should understand that it's not. I think they should, first of all, like try to shut out as much negativity as possible, whether it's intellectual negativity about why there are women's events or whether it's just harassment, and shut it out either by ignoring it when appropriate or by fighting it when appropriate, and by finding allies and friendships. I think that it's really important to know that chess is a very social game. People find love, they find their best friends in chess. So it's not like it's like feminine or you're being girly if you like focus on your relationships in chess. That's totally normal. That's what all players do. And I think that's actually key to maintaining your motivation in the game, to make good friends that can help you be the best versions of yourself in chess and outside of it. And I see that in the American girls who play, who are very successful. They have these great friendships. And I think it motivates them to be better than each other, but also to root for each other. It's like this simultaneous process. And so it's not a coincidence that you have Jennifer Yu, Annie Wang, and Carissa Yip all within a year or two of each other's age. And they're all about IM strength with like, 2,400 to 2,500 at just like 16 years old. That's really impressive. And if there wasn't one of them, there probably wouldn't be three of them.
I think it's even the last sentence where you say, great chess moves can pierce me with momentary but intense pleasure like a smile in a dream. Still, I'm distraught by how few women enjoy the freedom and pleasures that come with losing oneself in chess. To female readers, I pass the move on to you. So who do you see right now taking up, the responsibility to make the next move to advance women's interests in chess?
Oh, so many people. I mean, I certainly am doing a lot still, like with my work. In fact, I've become like, I think after writing Chess Bitch, I thought I was going to go down more like the writing path, but instead I still do some writing and I actually kind of want to get back to it. So I really appreciate your compliments. But I also do a lot of like just, organizing and fundraising. And yeah, one of the things that means the most to me is this women's program we have at US Chess, where we consciously work on building our numbers and getting more girls and women spaces where they can play and make friends. And there's so many other people that are working on this that make the job a lot easier because there's already this like platform. I mean, there's so many names to mention, but Gary Kasparov is working on it, Susan Polgar. There is, all sorts of small organizations across the country, that focus on bringing chess to girls and women, Chess Girls DC, Girls to Grandmasters, the Philadelphia Chess Society, name three that are kind of like in my area. And the St. Louis Chess Club is doing so much to promote girls and women in chess. It just seems like FIDE now is also, ever since Dvorkovich came into power, seems to be like even more invested in women in chess. It seems actually that it's a really hot topic and that there's a lot of people interested in it. That a lot of organizers are very interested in supporting and helping women right now. The question is, are we going about it the right way? Now, that's a harder question because I think in general, when people try to improve something, sometimes the creativity is lacking. They just kind of copy what somebody else is doing and replicate it. And that could be a bit of an issue. But overall, I mean, I'm just blown away by the amount of interest people have in this right now. It's like a dream come true, actually.
Especially streaming, right? Online streaming has really taken off.
Yeah, and Alexander Botez is incredibly popular. And I think that's really important too for young girls because they can see that you could be a world champion like, Ho Yifan or Alexander Kosteniuk, or you can make a career out of it by being, one of the most successful streamers or YouTubers. Anna Rudolph also. That's good because chess entertainment and chess content, I think, is extremely difficult as well. But it might be a skill set that women are particularly adept at because they're both. When you look at some of the top female content creators, you can see obviously they're good at chess, but they're also really good at people and hardworking. And like that combination of three things, that triple threat, I think is something you see in a lot of women. And that's why even though women might only comprise like 10 to 15% of competitive players, when it comes to entrepreneurs and great chess projects, they're absolutely overrepresented. There's more than 10%. I mean, maybe I'm biased because obviously I'm looking out for the ones, but I really do. I do think if you went down and you counted it out, you would see that there's a lot of women who are just trying to popularize the game, advance its education, and that's important.
One favorite question that you always ask other players. I thought I'll ask you just to end the interview and say, what is your favorite chess piece and why?
Well, I'm going to go with the Queen because the Queen encapsulates a lot of the history of women in chess I think, and it's also like a time capsule for, the advancement of women's rights in general, as the queen used to be the least powerful piece on the board. And then in 1500, when she became the most powerful, there was a lot of resistance to the new game, the Mad Women's Chess game, they called it. And this game ended up being the chess that we play today, a much better form of chess that was more exciting and quicker. So it's interesting to me that when women get more power, it usually improves institutions and games and cultures. But there is resistance in the beginning, backlash, if you will. And then there's an acceptance that actually things are better this way. And I think we see that in politics and chess, and we'll continue to see it more.